That quote, it just perfectly captures that electric feeling, doesn't it? That moment right before everything changes. It's this belief that the world doesn't have to be the way it is, that we can actually remake it. And wow, few events in history embody that belief more than the one we're diving into today.
So yeah, we're going to unpack the French Revolution. And this isn't just some dusty old history story. It was an event so huge, its aftershocks are still shaping our world right now.
To really get to the heart of this, let me start with a story. It's a really, really short one. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen.
And they both died. The end. Okay, so obviously that's a pretty dramatic way to put it, but it leaves us with the biggest question of all. How? How do you go from being an all-powerful king and queen to, well, being executed by your own people? That's the mystery we're going to solve.
The story of their downfall really explodes into action on one specific day, July 14th, 1789. That's the day an angry mob in Paris stormed the Bastille, this massive, scary old fortress that had come to symbolize the king's power. But what makes regular people just snap like that? What drives them to attack a symbol of the entire state?
Well, to get that, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the society they were living in. It's known as the Old Regime, and it was basically a system built on centuries of deep, deep unfairness.
I mean, just look at how things were split. You had this tiny group, about 2% of everybody, that's the nobility and the clergy from the church, and they had basically everything. All the wealth, all the power. And the other 98%? Yeah, that was just everyone else.
This whole system was officially called the Three Estates. You had the first estate, which was the church, the second estate, the nobility, and then the third estate, which was literally everybody else, from peasants to lawyers. But here's the craziest part. Look at who paid the taxes. The two groups with all the money and land, they paid next to nothing. The third estate, the 98%, they paid for the whole shebang.
There were these political cartoons back then that just summed it all up perfectly. You'd see this drawing of a poor peasant, totally broken down, and he's literally carrying the clergyman and the nobleman on his back. It's such a powerful image, right? It shows you exactly what it felt like to live in that system.
And we're not just talking about one tax here. Oh no. You had the tithe that went to the church, the tile that went to the government, tax after tax after tax. For the average person, it must have felt like they were being bled dry from every direction, while the most privileged people in the country were just living it up tax-free.
But while all this was happening, something else was brewing. A huge shift in thinking was sweeping across Europe. We call it the Enlightenment, and it was basically this incredible time when brilliant thinkers started asking, hey, why are things the way they are? Does society have to be structured like this?
See, for centuries, everyone just accepted this idea called the divine right of kings. The logic was pretty simple. God picked the king, so if you argue with the king, you're pretty much arguing with God. But then these Enlightenment philosophers came along and were like, wait a minute, no. They argue that a government's power actually comes from the people it governs. What a radical idea.
And this one line from the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau just nails it. Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. Wow, that really got people thinking about stuff we almost take for granted now. Things like liberty, equality, basic human rights. These weren't just theories. They were like pouring gasoline on a fire that was just waiting for a spark.
So let's recap. You've got this super unjust society. You've got a whole population buzzing with these brand new, radical ideas. It's a powder keg, right? It just needs a spark. And that spark, ironically, came from the king himself, Louis XVI, when he tried to fix his own money problems.
Here's the bottom line. France was flat broke. Seriously. Years of fighting expensive wars, plus Queen Marie Antoinette's legendary spending habits, I mean, she once wore a hairstyle with a literal model ship in it, had completely drained the treasury. So what's the king's brilliant idea? You guessed it, raise more taxes. But to do that, he had to call this big meeting of the Estates General, which was a kind of parliament that hadn't gotten together in 175 years. And from that moment on, things just went into hyperdrive. The third estate, remember, that's 98% of the people, shows up to the meeting and they're literally locked out of the hall. So what do? They march over to a nearby tennis court and swear an oath, right then and there, to write a whole new constitution. That was it. That was the point of no return. Less than 3 years later, the entire monarchy was gone. And here's a wild little fun fact that came out of all this, something we use every single day. In the new government that formed, the revolutionaries who wanted radical change all sat on the left side of the room. The conservatives who supported the king and tradition, they sat on the right. And that is literally where we get the political terms left-wing and right-wing. It all came down to where they sat in a room.
So, the revolutionaries won, the monarchy was gone, and a new republic was born, founded on these incredible ideals: liberty, equality, fraternity. It sounds like the perfect ending to the story, right? But it wasn't. The story takes a really, really dark turn here.
What happened next is known as the Reign of Terror, and it's just as horrifying as it sounds. The revolutionaries, led by a guy named Maximilien Robespierre, became totally consumed by paranoia. They started seeing enemies of the revolution everywhere. They made it so just being accused of not being supportive enough could get your head chopped off by the guillotine. Thousands of people were executed, often with no real proof, all in the name of purifying their new republic.
And then you get the ultimate irony. All that chaos and bloodshed created a power vacuum, and people were just desperate for some stability. And who steps into that mess? A brilliant military general named Napoleon Bonaparte. He seizes control in 1799, and a few years later, he crowns himself emperor. Think about that. They went through a whole revolution to get rid of one absolute ruler, and they ended up with another one.
So you have to ask yourself, was it all for nothing? Was the whole revolution just a failure? At first glance, it kind of seems that way. But here's the thing. Even though the revolution basically ate itself alive, the ideas it unleashed, well, you couldn't put that genie back in the bottle. The ideals of the French Revolution, democracy, secularism, the very idea of a republic where people are citizens with rights, they spread like wildfire across the globe. They became the blueprint for so many other movements for freedom. I mean, get this, the famous motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, is actually written right into the preamble of India's constitution. That's how far and wide these ideas traveled.
And that really gets to the true legacy of it all. The great Indian social reformer Dr. Ambedkar said his own life's work had the exact same goal: to create a society free from discrimination, where everyone is truly equal. So yeah, the revolution itself may have ended in terror and empire, but the central question it asked is still echoing today. What does it really mean to build a society of liberty, equality, and fraternity for all?